what's your favorite like way to learn as an entrepreneur? Could be a book, could be a podcast, anything.
Oh my God. I have 3 kids and I'm a solo founder, so I don't read books.
Mm. Hi, everyone. Welcome to an episode of the Founder Insights podcast on the Grow podcast for Interact. It's a long intro to the name of this podcast. My name is Josh. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Interact, and I am here with a special guest today, Shannon Davenport, who is the founder and CEO at Esker Beauty, a really cool beauty skincare brand, and they've been using a quiz for a few years, so that's also awesome. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, so I wanted to jump right in because, e-commerce is a segment of our audience, but it's a smaller segment, and I'm always so impressed and also curious at how one breaks into this market because it's so saturated. Like you hear about the big influencers, the big celebrities starting brands all the time, and that makes sense because it's like, okay, you can post to a few 100 million followers, sure, but how did you do it? Like, what happened back in 2018? It's been a while now. Like, what was the origin story, and how did you start getting customers in the beginning?
Yeah. So I have an unusual career path. I was a trend forecaster, which is a real job. Um not a very common job, but it is a real job. And so my job for 12 years was I worked for an agency and I basically went around the world and went to conferences, and I used to shoot street style fashion and go to store openings and basically just be a sponge for consumer brands and retailers. So I did that for a really long time. It was my dream job. I remember I'm like dating myself, but I read about it in a career book when I was like 20, and I was like a trend forecaster. That is what I want to be. And amazingly, I ended up being it because there's probably only a few thousand people maybe in the world that actually do this for a living. So I did that for a long time. I started out kind of working more for fashion and product-based brands. So in trend forecasting, like Toyota, for example, they want to decide on what color cars they're going to make in like 2028. And so they will come to a trend forecasting company and say, like, what colors are going to be cool in 2028? Is it going to be beige? Is it going to be neon green? Whatever. So I did that kind of work for several years. And then as consumer brands started to change and become disruptive, um, with like better for you products, like across the board and health and wellness, I started working with more CPG companies, more beauty companies. And it was my work with beauty companies that led me to see a gap in the market and not really a gap in the market because I was looking very forward, but a white space opportunity. So, beauty in particular was growing really, really fast, even back in 2017, 2018. And I was like, okay, beauty is becoming more than just a consumer category. It's kind of like becoming a whole category of media consumption. And it's almost sort of like a hobby now. For a lot of people, it's like kind of a lifestyle thing, like beauty and health and wellness. And I was like, there is a lot of opportunity for brands to be created right now in this beauty and health and wellness space. And I have an idea for one that I think would be massive, and that was a body care only brand in the kind of prestige space. So that was that was it. And then I put my head down for a while and started building on nights and weekends while I was working full time.
Okay, that makes like a lot of sense. Because I've seen your brand, obviously, since you've had a quiz for quite a while, and first time I came across it, I'm like, I've never seen a brand that's focused on body care. Like skin
Yeah.
care is so concentrated around like face, and then like little parts of your face, like your eyelids, it's like, here's a cream for
Hmm.
your eyelids. And it's like, whoa,
Yeah.
but what about the
Yeah.
rest? Like your skin is your largest organ, and you're only
Yeah.
dealing with 5-10% of it, whatever your head is.
Yeah.
Um, that's crazy.
Not even
So
your whole head, just the front of your head.
right, yeah, like
Yeah.
maybe someone should make a back of the head skincare brand. Um,
They're
but
out there. There's a lot of scalp care brands too.
okay, well,
See?
today I learned. Um, but it makes a way more sense that you were working in trend forecasting and could see these channels coming. That's such an interesting origin story. Honestly, I haven't heard really, I've never heard somebody come at it from that approach. Usually, and I'm sure you've heard this a million times, it's like, oh, I worked at Sephora, or I worked at a skincare brand, and I saw that like people were asking for this product, but it didn't exist, which is kind of similar, I guess. But um, that's fascinating. Was that trend forecasting? Was that like highly? I mean, it had to be highly analytical, but we were dealing with like huge amounts of data. Like, what kind of technology were you using?
Um, so I'm smiling because this is like what I used to answer from my clients all the time when I was a trend forecaster, because they'd be like, "How do you know?" Um, so it's kind of goes back to that like old Steve Jobs thing when he was like talking about the iPhone. And he's like, you can't survey customers about, like, if he was going to do data to he never could have used data to make the iPhone, because nobody knew they wanted an iPhone until they had one. So it's like part data, and it's also part qualitative cultural stuff. So it really is like, which sounds kind of airy fairy and sounds kind of like crystal ballish, but it is true. There's an art and a science to it. So like you can look at data that shows you like, hey, the beauty industry is growing really fast. Um, but there isn't going to be data that says like, necessary, unless you know to ask that question, right? Like, hey, people really are interested in the skin below their chin. And because you're almost like before that question that you're asking. So it's almost like starting even before that, because, when you're really creating something, I don't never know why these, why does it do this? Why are balloons coming up while I'm talking? Um, but yeah, so I think like, you know, it's interesting to be kind of on the ground on the market listening to customers, but I also do think that some of innovation comes even before the data will tell you. Like to really be like a real early adopter with your brand, like it is looking at data, and then it's also really connecting the dots. And when I was working in trends, it was a lot of like, you kind of look at outlier brands and you look at like outlier conversations and early adopter customers, and you start to connect the dots between, like, for example, with Bath and Body, like a lot of the stuff that we talk about with our brand is not new at all in other parts of the world. It's just new in the US. So you look at places like Finland and Japan and Turkey, there's this Bath and Body culture and holistic health and wellness, and like, people doing bathing and body exfoliation and thinking a lot about the skin below their chin in other cultures. It's just not very prominent in the US, or it's becoming more and more prominent. So that's an example of like, we didn't invent this stuff, but we did connect the dots and looked at the data and said, okay, people are really interested in beauty and in all these different categories, and they're embracing wellness in every part of their, of their lives. And meanwhile, we've got this going on around the world with Bath and Body and bathing rituals. Like, how do we marry those two? And so it's a lot of thinking like that. That's like part data, but part also just expanding your lens and looking across the market, maybe looking outside the US, maybe looking at products that have come in and out of culture throughout the years. So it's really fun. I really liked doing that job. It's really interesting. You get to use like all parts of your brain and really put together kind of a case for what you're building.
Yeah, that's really cool. I was just in Turkey, and until you said that, I wouldn't have connected those dots. But it's like, yeah, there's
Yeah.
actually a huge industry. There's like
Yeah, there's the whole
bathhouses
hammams.
on
Yep.
every block. Like
Yep.
it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Um, and we don't have those in the US. Like every once in a while you'll try to find one. You're like, oh, it'd be great to do, body scrub and
Yeah.
whatnot. And like if you can find one, it's extremely expensive.
Yep.
It's super interesting. And it makes sense what you're saying. It's also the same for us. Like before we started the quiz thing, it was like there was no market for it, but people were using quizzes in certain areas and they were super popular. So it's like, well, it makes sense then that it should translate over. So, next question for you is how do you know? How do you know when to go for it? Like with Esker now, like how do you decide like when there's enough evidence where you're going to launch a new product or go into a new area? And two-part question, also like how did you know initially that like there was enough evidence here where it's like I'm going to go for it. I'm going to start a business.
Yeah. So this is an interesting question because I think in a lot of ways you don't always win by being first because a lot of times you are, and that's kind of like a trend forecaster's curse, I guess, like for me is like, and believe it or not, I have a lot of trend forecaster friends too, who like colleagues that like have become lifetime friends, but like there's something to be said for like when something is just too early. And even if it's a good idea, sometimes it's just too early and people aren't ready, especially if it has to do with behavior. Like you're creating a product or something that requires like people actually changing their behavior. There definitely is such a thing as too early. And a lot of times when you're an early brand, who is building like early on in the space. I'm sure there's like good examples, but I can't think of any right now. But um, of people that were like kind of ahead of their time. And a lot of times you have to just sort of be mindful about that because you might be laying the framework and establishing the market for somebody else to be like, oh, that's interesting what they're doing. And I've seen it in my own business. Like I've seen competitors that now have businesses that have raised capital, like buy my products and test them. And I mean, not in a way where I'm saying like they're necessarily like copying or anything directly, but like, they're doing their research. Fair enough, right? That's like what this is all about. Um, so I think, knowing like when the right time is pretty hard, but I think that one of the things that you can use is data, and we have definitely worked some of that into our quiz data. I will also tell you having kind of industry experts verify. So for us, we actually didn't start out with ecom out the gate because I wasn't a digital marketer and I also bootstrapped the company. So I didn't have like, hey, let's raise money and put like $100,000 into ads. We didn't do that at all. So I actually found, because of my career in like fashion and beauty and having worked in trends for 12 years and worked in New York and LA, I had a good amount of industry contacts. So I actually took it to buyers first. And so I got in touch with Goop, which is Gwyneth Paltrow's company, and I found the buyers and I brought the product to those buyers and they understood it and they liked it. And I was like, okay, these are buyers. They see nothing but product day in, day out, and they're not going to mince words. They're not going to mess around. So they were like some of the first buy, and there were a couple other really cool like boutiques that were again kind of going back to that idea of like early adopters. Like Goop is a perfect example of early adopter type of company. And so the buyers, they liked it, they got it, and they're like, okay, let's do it. Let's pick up the product. So they were one of my very first market validation touch points. And honestly, if I hadn't gotten that kind of validation from them, and then Anthropologie also was a retailer that came on really early, and again, like their buyers do a really good job. They're very trend focused, they're always looking at the market. And then Net-a-Porter is another retailer that's kind of a fashion luxury retailer that was like same thing, like very progressive, cool company, brings on brands early, does lots of early adoption across the business. And so those were 3 retailers that we were able to work with in the first year of business. And so that was for me, obviously it's more anecdotal data points, but really good like market validation that like, okay, I'm not crazy. There is something here. So that was part of it for me too, was like going into like trusted experts who see a lot of product and see a lot of stuff and being like, what do you think? So that was a big part.
Yeah, just comment on that. I feel like the nuance that's really important there is you went to someone that would tell you an honest answer. I feel like a lot of people in the beginning will not do that. They'll take
Yeah.
it to friends or family who are not going to be honest. Like,
Yeah.
even if they're trying to be honest, they're not. Well, I don't know, maybe some of your family or friends are honest, but
Yeah.
usually people choose softballs, but you went straight into like the, Shohei Ohtani, like 100
Yeah.
mile an hour fastball. Let's go for it.
Yeah.
Um, that's that seems very smart to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I didn't want to do it if people were like, this is stupid.
Yeah.
And I also like, when I was in my job, like I used to walk a lot of trade shows and I used to just see aisles and aisles and aisles of product that was not differentiated, which I wasn't a buyer. I was like looking for trends and interesting products on behalf of my clients. But kind of similar to a buyer, I was like applying a filter to lots of products that were out there. And it's like there's just a lot of product that's just not very differentiated at all. And it would always just be like I would come out of those trade shows like in Vegas where there's just like plastic crap and just like product and packaging and whatever for like, you know, like, couple square miles and you're just like, I don't know why all this stuff needs to exist. So I tried to always come from that perspective too of like if I walked by my own product in a trade show, like would I think it was cool? And if the answer is no, then I don't want to make that product.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that. I mean, I think that's such another simple thing, but people miss that too, where if you're really honest about it, it's like, would you use your own thing? No. And then it's like, well, why do you think someone else is going to buy it? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's cool. I like that you went into it just straight in the deep end. I mean, it makes sense that you survived because you kind of got a lot of the hard stuff out of the way in the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, first of all, is this going to stand out against a bazillion other products? Second of all, is the hardest possible person, the buyers at these companies, gonna be interested? And you hit those right off the bat. So then talk to me about like what the scaling process looked like. Like how big are you guys now, or whatever numbers you care to share about team or revenue or whatever. How big are you now? And then what did you do when it was like, okay, we have validation, now we go?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the $1 million question, literally and figuratively. So we are a $1 million business. We've been over $1 million for a few years. This year is the year that we have a path to 5 million. We have a bunch of new initiatives. And last year for ecom was pretty shitty year for a lot of people, including us, because it was the year we really stopped seeing like paid media performing, in a predictable way. And so I think anybody who works in ecom or has raised money has heard this many, many times, but we actually did those adjustments of like, you know, not spending money just to spend money, pulling back on things that don't have a really solid proven ROAS, focusing on path to profitability. So last year was, for a lot of e-commerce brands and consumer brands, including us, last year was like a big kind of correction year, I think, or like market correction or like refocusing of how to build a business from predictably, I think, being able to scale with paid ads and scale e-com like in a fairly like steady formulaic way where like if you're scaling your ads, you know, directionally kind of know like how much you're going to put in and how much you're going to get back, to like where that whole thing became upended. So last year, we went through a lot of the process that a lot of people like in the CPG and e-commerce community would be familiar with at this point, which was, pulling way back on paid media that wasn't performing, kind of going back to the drawing board and really rethinking about that, not burning cash doesn't have a very clear ROAS, or like a shorter term ROAS, and, shortening our path to profitability and just getting really serious about like what parts of our business make sense for our small team and our limited budget to really laser focus on. And so we are a really small team. We are, we're we bounce between like bringing certain functions in house and then having agencies. And so there's a little bit of a flux with that, but we're basically like three full-time people internally, and then a good mix of agency support across traditional PR, paid media, email and SMS, a 3PL that does all of our shipping and operations. And that's kind of it. And we have a wholesale team too that works with our retailers. So mostly like completely remote, a lot of fractional support, but like one full-time marketing person internally and one full-time operations person internally, and me. And I still wear a lot of hats, and I like to take off some of those hats so that I can do more business development stuff, which is we're raising capital right now. So that's what that's partly for, is building our team. But, I think, and then focusing on those things that are going to scale and are less of like, let's try it. And let's like, as opposed to let's double down on these efforts because they're working. And this is the year that, last year we were getting our house in order. And this year, we're going to not put the house on the market, but you know what I mean? Like show the house,
Yep. Yep.
open
I
up
hear
the
you.
doors. Yeah.
I hear you on that. It hit us a year-ish earlier, maybe 2 years earlier,
Mm,
where everything that was predictable became unpredictable.
yeah.
Um, and then it was a process to figure out what actually was working.
Yeah.
Um, Curious to dive into that process. Like, what did that look like? And then you mentioned that you have a path to scale it now. Like, what did you learn from things that were predictable becoming unpredictable and then having to get really like stringent?
Yeah. I think, for the hard thing as a founder, I think when you're working with agencies is, even if you've got a great agency, it's not your business. And there's not, when you are, and I have agencies that I've worked with for like 3, 4, 5 years. So I love agencies that, and this isn't a diss on agencies at all, but sometimes it doesn't make sense to, as a founder, to outsource really business critical things to other people. Unless you're like really, really enmeshed with it. And you just have to pick and choose, I think, as a founder, something like paid media, if that's a huge driver of your business and it's not performing like it used to because of the algorithms or whatever, how long do you give that until you say like, okay, we got to pause, we got to rethink? Um, because I think just, there's no, it's just not cut and dried anymore. Again, it's like a mix of art and science. And so you can scale your ads and you can do audience testing, but like, what is the creative driving, and is the creative like really meaningful, and is it teaching your customers something? And again, like us going into body care and your point about like the body skin type quiz, like our paid media needs to be driven by value, content that gives value. And so you were saying like with our body skin type quiz, that was kind of goes back to my whole thesis with the company to start with, which is people spend all this money and time on their face, but your body is your skin is your largest organ, and 95% of it is from the skin below the chin, as we like to say. And so is the core mission, and again, being in a white space and educating and trying to change behavior requires like a lot of thoughtfulness that can't necessarily just be outsourced to an agency. And so for me, it was like, let's get back to the basics of like what we're doing, what we're building. And we have our body skin type quiz, which basically is, hey, you know your facial skin type. Almost every woman knows their facial skin type. Like, I have combination skin, I have oily skin, I have dry skin. That's just a thing a lot of women know, like growing up and being part of like beauty culture or whatever, if someone's into that. And so this whole thing about like bringing awareness to the body and bathing and bath and body and exfoliating your body and what's good for the skin on your body, it requires education. And you can't expect an outside party to necessarily go to the core of your business and your mission and education and be able to build out a winning strategy for that. I think that really comes from the founder and the thoughtfulness behind the brand. So, you know, for us, like that was really like, and it still continues to be going back to the customer, going back to the market, and like, what are we doing and saying that's different about body care, and how are we making a case for the skin below your chin, and what are we teaching our customer, and is it compelling to them, and why should they care?
That's awesome, because it's the same answer that we ended up with.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
how do you convey the core of what is valuable about what you're doing in a way that's educational, but the creative is also compelling and tells a very clear story? Do you feel like things also kind of simplified through that time?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, things did simplify quite a bit. And I think sometimes it even just gets back to like your core messaging, talking to your audience, and like, what is the dang simplest thing that you're trying to say and offer? And when you're pitching as a founder too, it's like the same kind of thing. It's like, you got to get this, you got to really boil this down into like one sentence, like one. And so like a lot of it is testing too. And like, I always say the skin below the chin, because people always remember it. And it's like, okay, like, gotta go back to simplify this, and like, what are you actually offering? What are you actually selling? What are you actually trying to cut through the noise? And at the end of the day, like, we are body care, we're for the skin below the chin. And at the end of the day, what I'm actually selling and talking to people about is relaxing, taking care of themselves in their home, and everything needs to ladder back up to that at the end of the day, you know?
Yeah. That's that feels so relevant to, I mean, they call it like wartime versus peacetime, business operations. And, I love the story of Sony, because it started like literally post-war Japan, Tokyo, like decimated city. And like everything they did was just so simple. I'm like, they've pretty much stayed on that since then.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, they have this, and like, even think back to like the Walkman. It's like a very simple device.
Yeah. Even the name.
Yeah, exactly. Everything's simple. It's like straightforward, simple. That feels like a great takeaway from this episode, honestly.
Yeah.
Keep it simple.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah, I know. That's my favorite. Before we wrap up, though, I have some semi-selfish questions to ask. First of all, what's your favorite like way to learn as an entrepreneur? Could be a book, could be a podcast, anything.
Oh my God. I have 3 kids, and I'm a solo founder, so I don't read books. I seriously do not read. Like, I went to college and stuff, so I know I do know how to read a book, but I have not picked one up and actually like turned the pages. I also am a founder, and so I'm weird, and I haven't like taken a real vacation in a long time and things like that. But I love podcasts. I love when I can do something with my hands and also listen. And I listen to a lot of books. So I do a lot of Audible books, but I do not like turn the page of a book, which is funny because my husband is an author and an illustrator. And he actually makes real books with paper. But so I love podcasts and I love to like do something with my hands. Like I love to garden or like just like organize or clean while I listen to stuff. That's like how my brain gets into flow. And then just like talking to a lot of, I really like try to stay connected with other founders and people in the startup space and just have conversations and trade notes and share knowledge. Like that's, I always feel like there's like something I can learn from everybody. So I try to stay really connected with other founders and I say yes to most conversations if I feel like I can learn something, because I can always learn something, even if I learn like, oh, that was, I don't think I like that, that person or the way they're doing business. It's still good. Like I find that if I say yes to things and yes to conversations and meetings, I almost always end up on top.
That's a good perspective. I feel like I get
Yeah.
upset when I take a meeting and then I'm like, that was a waste of time. But
Yeah.
it's a good mindset shift right there.
Yeah.
Also, I at least amongst a lot of the founders that I've talked to, because I also don't read books, I listen, and I think a lot of founders do. Wonder if there's like a founder trait in there somewhere.
Some ADHD, like
Yeah.
impatience thing or something.
We're all doing a million things at once.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you could go back to 2018 and give yourself some advice or forewarning, or you could be the Gandalf to give wisdom, what would you tell yourself?
I would have, well, I have some like easy ones. Like I would have spent money on paid ads when it was cheap.
Mm.
And I probably would have like built my personal brand and all of that stuff earlier when it was easier. But that's not super helpful now. So that's kind of coulda, woulda, shoulda. I think I would have just I honestly probably would have put myself out there more as a founder. And I think sometimes it's just hard to put yourself out there, especially when you're somebody who just wants to build. And like, I really just like my market and my product, and I really want to make cool products. And I kind of want to be behind the scenes. But the fact of the matter is that the way that everything is now, there's content mixed in with everything and stories mixed in with everything. And like, I just always thought like, well, who cares like what my story is or what I think, like as long as my product's really cool and really beautiful. And I think that has like fundamentally shifted. And I would have, I think, just put more of my personal self forward with my brand. And beauty is a really personal category. And not that the brand needs to be about me or like my face or my life or my kids or anything like that, because I've never really wanted that. I'm a little bit more private. But I think just like as a brand and an entrepreneur and founder, just being more forthcoming about, having a small business and a startup is an inherently personal thing. So I think putting more of myself forward, and connecting more with my customers and connecting with my partners and just kind of putting myself more present into the arena, is something that I would have done earlier, knowing what I know now. And some of that comes with age and practice too.
I mean, that's great advice for anybody that's listening that's towards the beginning, or honestly at any stage. I think that's good advice. So before we wrap up, is there anything new that you guys are doing that you want to highlight, or just share your URL so people can check out the very cool stuff that you have?
Yeah, definitely check it out. Take your body skin type quiz, learn about the skin on your body, which by the way can change whether you're postpartum or you're pregnant or you had a lot of like sun exposure or There's a lot of things that affect our skin, hormonal shifts, our skin on our bodies too, not just our skin on our faces. Um, so do that and learn something new about yourself. Um, and let's see what else. So that's eskerbeauty.com, and our quiz is in our menu. Um, and then we are launching at Nordstrom in a few weeks. And Mother's Day is coming up, and we've got some really fun Mother's Day gifts. And we love Mother's Day. We love gifting because, again, at the end of the day, we're all about relaxation and self-care. And there's like nothing better or kinder than giving somebody an opportunity to take care of themselves, especially if they're somebody who has spent a lot of time taking care of others. So yeah, check out think about your Mother's Day gifts. Don't miss it. Definitely make sure that you have got some gifts lined up for the moms or mom figures in your life. And yeah, look out for us at Nordstrom coming
Yeah.
soon.
Well, congratulations. That's awesome. And yeah,
Thank you.
definitely very important holiday. Um, cool. Well, thanks so much, Shannon. Really appreciate you sharing some wisdom with our audience, and best of luck with everything. It's
Thank
it's a cool
you.
brand.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks.